There's a strange feeling many young adults have today, but rarely talk about out loud. On paper, their life looks stable. They have a degree, they have a job, they pay their bills on time. They're responsible, careful, even disciplined with money. And yet, they feel like they're slowly falling behind. Not dramatically, not in a crisis, just quietly, consistently behind. This isn't about luxury. This isn't about wanting more than previous generations had. It's about something much simpler. The growing realization that a normal life, the kind of life that once felt predictable and attainable, is becoming financially harder to reach. And the unsettling part is this. Many of them did everything right. They followed the advice, they made the safe choices, they worked hard, stayed consistent, and avoided major financial mistakes. But the outcome they were promised isn't arriving on the timeline they expected. This video is about why that's happening and why this feeling isn't a personal failure, but a structural shift that an entire generation is experiencing at the same time. For decades, there was a widely accepted life formula. Study hard, go to college, get a stable job, save money, and slowly, year by year, you'll build a secure and predictable life. You might not become wealthy overnight, but you'd eventually be able to afford your own place, cover your healthcare, maybe raise a family, and retire with some dignity. This wasn't just optimism. For many people in the late 20th century, this formula actually worked. It wasn't perfect, but it was reliable enough that parents, teachers, and guidance counselors repeated it with confidence. The assumption was simple. If you did the right things, the system would meet you halfway. But here's what's quietly changed. Today, many Gen Z adults are following the exact same steps and reaching very different financial outcomes. The inputs are similar, the effort is still there, but the results feel delayed, stretched, or in some cases, permanently out of reach. And that disconnect is creating a subtle but powerful shift in how young adults perceive their future. Because when the path forward becomes less predictable, every financial decision starts to feel heavier. The easiest place to see this shift is in the cost of basic living. Housing in particular tells a clear story. For previous generations, buying a home in your late 20s or early 30s was challenging, but achievable with stable employment and disciplined saving. Today, in many cities, the price of entry has moved dramatically higher. What once required a few years of saving now often requires a decade or more, especially when rent, insurance, and daily expenses continue to rise alongside housing costs. You're not just saving for a home anymore. You're saving while simultaneously paying historically high rent. And that changes everything, because rent isn't just a temporary expense. It quietly delays wealth building years at a time. Every extra year spent renting is another year not building equity, another year exposed to rising housing prices, another year watching the goalpost move slightly further away. You're running on a treadmill that keeps subtly increasing in speed. You're still moving forward, but the finish line keeps drifting further out of reach. Education adds another layer to this financial pressure. For many young adults, going to college wasn't framed as a luxury. It was framed as a necessary investment. The degree was supposed to unlock stability, access to better jobs, higher earning potential, a smoother path toward long-term financial security. And statistically, higher education can still improve lifetime earnings, but the cost of obtaining that education has risen significantly over time, while early career wages have grown much more slowly in real inflation-adjusted terms. This creates a more complex equation than previous generations faced. It's no longer just about whether college increases earnings, it's about whether the increased earnings arrive fast enough to offset the higher upfront cost. For many, the answer is not immediately. And those early years matter more than they seem, because your 20s are when savings, investments, and financial habits begin compounding. Delays during this period don't just postpone progress, they reshape the entire financial timeline that follows. You're not simply starting later, you're starting from a different position entirely. Work itself has also changed in subtle but meaningful ways. Opportunities still exist. Entire industries are growing. New career paths are emerging that didn't even exist a decade ago. But stability, the quiet, predictable kind,
has become less common early in one's career. Many young professionals today navigate contract roles, short-term employment cycles, or positions that offer income but limited long-term security. This doesn't necessarily mean they're unsuccessful. In fact, many are highly skilled and hardworking. But the nature of modern employment often places more risk on the individual and less on the institution. You're expected to be adaptable, continuously learning, continuously proving value, which can be empowering but also exhausting because stability used to be something you gradually grew into. Now, it often feels like something you must constantly defend. And when income feels less predictable, long-term financial planning becomes more cautious. You hesitate before committing to large financial decisions. You delay major life milestones, not because you don't want them, but because the margin for error feels smaller than it once did. Beyond housing and education, there are smaller, quieter expenses that collectively shape this experience. Healthcare, transportation, insurance, subscriptions, rising food prices, each one individually manageable, but together they create a constant baseline cost of simply participating in modern life. You don't feel broke, but you rarely feel ahead either. And that middle ground is psychologically significant because financial stress isn't always about immediate crisis. Sometimes it's about the persistent awareness that one unexpected expense could disrupt carefully balanced plans. That awareness changes how people think about risk. They become more cautious, more calculated, more focused on maintaining stability than chasing rapid growth, which ironically can make financial progress feel slower, even when they're doing everything responsibly. What makes this moment unique is timing. Gen Z is entering adulthood during a period where multiple economic pressures are overlapping simultaneously. Rising housing costs, high education expenses, shifting job stability, and a broader awareness of long-term financial uncertainty. Previous generations faced some of these challenges individually, but facing them all at once changes the psychological experience of early adulthood. It creates the feeling that the traditional milestones of adulthood, living independently, buying property, starting families, building long-term financial security, are being delayed not by choice, but by circumstance. You're not refusing the traditional path. You're being asked to navigate a version of it that is objectively more expensive and structurally less predictable. And recognizing that difference is important because it reframes the narrative. This isn't about a generation being less disciplined, less motivated, or less capable. It's about a generation adapting to a different economic environment than the one the original life blueprint was designed for. But something interesting happens when enough people share the same experience. They start asking different questions. Not just, how do I work harder? But is the structure I'm working within still optimized for the life I want to build? That shift in questioning is subtle, but powerful. Because once you recognize that the definition of a normal life is changing, you stop measuring progress only by old timelines and old expectations. You start focusing more on flexibility, resilience, and long-term optionality rather than just speed. You begin prioritizing stability in new ways. Designing careers differently, saving more intentionally, thinking globally about opportunities instead of purely locally, not out of rebellion, but out of practicality. So when we say Gen Z is being priced out of normal life, it doesn't mean stability is impossible. It means the cost, timing, and structure of stability have fundamentally shifted. The milestones still exist. They're just arriving later, requiring more planning and depending on a wider range of strategic decisions than before. And that realization can feel discouraging at first, but it also creates a different kind of awareness. An awareness that the traditional path is no longer the only path worth considering. That success may not look identical to previous generations, but can still be deeply meaningful and sustainable in new ways. In many ways, Gen Z isn't just facing higher prices. They're facing a redefinition of what a stable, normal life actually costs in the modern economy. And that realization can feel heavy because it forces difficult questions earlier than expected. Questions about where to live, how to work, what financial risks are worth taking, and which ones aren't. But it also encourages something else, intentionality, a more deliberate approach to designing life, rather than assuming stability will emerge automatically over time. The system hasn't collapsed, but it has evolved. And when systems evolve, the strategies required to navigate them must evolve too. So this isn't just a story about rising costs. It's a story about a generation learning in real time that the definition of normal life is being rewritten. And the ones experiencing that shift first will also be the ones who eventually figure out how to build stability within it. Not by perfectly following the old blueprint, but by understanding why that blueprint no longer produces the same results and adapting intelligently to the reality in front of them. That's not failure, that's awareness. And awareness is where every long-term financial strategy truly begins.